You solve problems that leave other people overwhelmed. You notice details most people never see. You anticipate outcomes before they happen. You take responsibility without being asked, because somewhere inside you, there's a quiet belief that if you don't hold everything together, no one else will. That way of moving through the world has earned you respect. It has built careers, protected families, created stability where there was once uncertainty. So why does it disappear the moment love enters the equation? Why do intelligent, emotionally aware women keep finding themselves trapped in relationships that feel confusing instead of secure? Different man, different beginning, the same ending. You promise yourself you will never tolerate emotional inconsistency again. Then somehow, months later, you're lying awake at night, wondering why someone who once pursued you now feels impossible to reach. If intelligence can't prevent the pattern, what can? The answer has very little to do with choosing the wrong people. It has everything to do with a relationship blueprint that was quietly written long before you ever started dating. And until that blueprint becomes visible, your nervous system will continue treating familiar patterns as if they were safe, even when they are slowly breaking your heart. This pattern has a name: the Relational Reciprocity Trap. Imagine placing two powerful magnets on a table. The harder one magnet pushes forward, the stronger the other pushes away. Neither magnet is choosing to behave this way. They simply follow the forces built into them. Relationships shaped by insecure attachment often operate the same way. One nervous system moves towards connection to create safety. The other moves away from connection to preserve safety. Both people believe they're protecting the relationship, yet every attempt to feel secure accidentally creates more distance. This is why the harder you try to understand, reassure, explain, or repair, the further away the relationship seems to drift. Not because you're asking for too much, but because you're unknowingly activating a system that responds to pursuit with withdrawal. Here's what makes this trap so painful. It doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like love. Most people think anxious attachment means needing more affection. It doesn't. It means your nervous system has learned to measure safety by emotional closeness. The moment that closeness changes even slightly, your body notices before your mind does. The delayed reply, a shorter text, a different tone of voice, plans that suddenly feel uncertain. None of these moments are objectively dangerous, but your nervous system isn't asking, is this relationship safe? It's asking something much older. Am I safe again? That single question quietly drives everything that follows. You replay conversations. You search for hidden meanings. You rehearse explanations. You begin working harder inside the relationship than either person realizes. Not because you're weak, because somewhere in your earliest experiences, love became linked with vigilance. Your nervous system learned that staying emotionally alert increased the chances of staying emotionally connected. Back then, that adaptation may have protected you. Today, it often keeps alive the very cycle you're trying to escape. But here's the part almost everyone misunderstands. The avoidant partner is rarely running away from intimacy itself. They're running from what intimacy has historically cost them. And that changes everything. Most people imagine the anxious partner as the one carrying emotional wounds. But every insecure attachment style is an adaptation to the same question. How do I stay safe when relationships feel unpredictable? The answer simply looks different. One nervous system learns to move closer, the other learns to move away. Neither strategy is random. Both are remarkably intelligent survival responses. The anxious partner discovers that closeness reduces fear. The avoidant partner discovers that distance reduces fear. And because each person's solution threatens the other person's sense of safety, the relationship slowly becomes a system where both people unintentionally reinforce the very behavior they are trying to escape. The more one reaches, the more the other retreats. The more the other retreats, the stronger the urge to reach. Not because either person lacks love, because both nervous systems are trying to regulate themselves in opposite directions. This is the relational reciprocity trap in motion. Not two people failing, two protective systems colliding. Imagine it's almost 11 o'clock. You sent a thoughtful message hours ago. He finally replies. 3 words, no warmth, no curiosity, just enough to acknowledge you. Most people will read that text and move on. But your nervous system notices something different. It notices the change. Within seconds, your mind begins searching for answers. Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I ask what's happening? Should I give him space? You replay yesterday's conversation. You reread old messages. You convince yourself that if you can just understand the shift, you can fix it before it grows. So you write a long response, gentle, careful, understanding. You aren't trying to argue. You're trying to restore emotional safety. But on the other side of the conversation, something very different is happening. He sees another emotionally loaded message. His nervous system doesn't experience it as reassurance. It experiences it as pressure. Not because your needs are unreasonable, because emotional intensity has historically meant losing freedom. So he waits longer before replying, or his response becomes even shorter, or he disappears completely. And suddenly, the fear you were trying to prevent becomes the reality you're living. This is why reassurance often feels like it works until it doesn't, because reassurance calms the mind. It doesn't heal the nervous system. Here's one of the most painful truths about this cycle. The anxious partner isn't actually chasing the other person. She's chasing certainty. Those are not the same thing. Certainty temporarily quiets the nervous system. A loving text, a phone call, an apology, a promise. For a moment, everything feels peaceful again. But because the underlying attachment blueprint hasn't changed, the calm slowly fades. The nervous system begins scanning once more. Not because the relationship became unsafe, because uncertainty has become the lens through which safety is measured. This is why anxious attachment feels so exhausting. You're not simply experiencing the relationship, you're monitoring it constantly, quietly, automatically. And the longer this continues, the easier it becomes to mistake hypervigilance for love itself. But what if the real problem isn't your ability to love? What if it's the way your nervous system has learned to recognize love in the first place? That question changes everything. Because once you understand that attachment is a blueprint, not a personality, you stop asking, why do I keep attracting this? And start asking, what inside me keeps recognizing this as familiar? Those are very different questions. One keeps your attention fixed on other people. The other quietly returns it to the only place real change can happen, your own nervous system. This is also why trying harder rarely works. You can communicate more clearly, become more patient, read every relationship book you can find, learn every conflict resolution strategy. But if your nervous system still interprets emotional inconsistency as something that must be solved, your behavior will eventually return to the same pattern. Not because you failed, because survival patterns always override intellectual understanding. Knowledge creates awareness. Regulation creates change. This is where most relationship advice unintentionally falls short. It teaches better communication, better boundaries, better wording. Those things matter, but they're often introduced before the nervous system is capable of using them. Imagine asking someone to think clearly why a fire alarm is blaring beside them. The problem isn't intelligence. The problem is activation. Your nervous system works much the same way. When it detects possible disconnection, your body shifts into protection long before your conscious mind has a chance to evaluate reality. That's why you promise yourself you'll stay calm, then send the text anyway. You promise yourself you won't overthink, then replay the conversation all weekend. You aren't breaking your own promises. You're following a blueprint your body still believes is necessary for survival. Once you see that, something remarkable happens. You stop judging yourself and you become curious instead. Think back to your last relationship, not the ending, the beginning. How quickly did emotional uncertainty become emotional investment? How often were you trying to earn consistency instead of simply observing whether consistency already existed? This is one of the clearest fingerprints of an anxious attachment blueprint. Healthy relationships usually become safer over time. Trauma-driven relationships often become more consuming over time. Those experiences can feel almost identical in the beginning. Only one becomes peaceful, the other becomes addictive. And that's an important distinction. Because anxiety and chemistry can produce many of the same physical sensations: a racing heart, constant thoughts, intense anticipation, relief whenever the other person finally responds. For years, many people mistake that emotional volatility for passion. It isn't. It's a nervous system moving between activation and temporary relief. Those are not the same thing. This is exactly why mapping your attachment blueprint matters before trying to change it. Patterns become much easier to interrupt once you can finally see them. That's why we created the Executive Attachment Audit. It's a clinical style assessment designed to identify the specific attachment strategies shaping your relationships today. Not just your attachment label, but how those patterns influence the partners you choose, the way you respond to conflict, the partners you actually need, the unconscious standards your nervous system has accepted as normal, and more. For many people, it's the first time their relationship history stops feeling random and starts making sense. If you'd like to explore your own blueprint in more detail, you'll find a link in the description below. Not a quick fix, but a starting point for understanding yourself with far greater clarity. Because you can't rewrite a blueprint you haven't yet learned to read. And once you do, the work changes. It stops becoming about chasing reassurance. It becomes about learning how to create safety that no longer depends on someone else's behavior. Real healing doesn't begin the moment someone finally loves you the way you've always hoped. It begins the moment your nervous system no longer requires another person's consistency to experience its own. That is the shift. Because when your internal sense of safety becomes stronger than your fear of losing someone, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop chasing conversations that have already given you answers. You stop explaining your worth to people who were never equipped to recognize it. You stop confusing emotional effort with emotional compatibility. Not because you've become guarded, Because you've become grounded. And grounded people evaluate relationships differently. They don't ask, how do I make this work? They quietly observe, does this already work? That single shift changes almost every decision that follows. At first, it feels unfamiliar. You'll notice the urge to send one more message, to explain one more time, to search for one more sign that everything is okay. This urge may still appear, but for the first time, you don't automatically obey it. You notice it, you understand it, and then you let it pass. That is regulation. Not eliminating anxiety, but changing your relationship despite it. Little by little, your nervous system begins collecting a new kind of evidence. You survive without chasing. You survive without over-explaining. You survive without abandoning yourself to preserve someone else's comfort. Those experiences become the foundation of an entirely different blueprint. One built through repetition, not willpower. Eventually, something unexpected happens. The people who once felt irresistible begin to feel emotionally expensive, not because they've changed, but because you have. This is the quiet transformation almost nobody talks about. Healing doesn't simply change the relationships you keep. It changes the relationships you're capable of feeling attracted to. The chaos that once felt exciting begins to feel exhausting. The inconsistency that once felt mysterious becomes predictable, and the peace that once felt unfamiliar begins to feel like home. That's when your standards stop being rules you try to follow. They become a reflection of your nervous system. You no longer need to convince yourself to choose differently. Different simply feels natural. One day, you'll meet someone who would have consumed your thoughts a year ago. Someone whose inconsistency would have sent you searching for answers. And you'll notice something quite extraordinary. Your mind doesn't begin solving. Your body doesn't begin chasing. The urgency never arrives. For a moment, you may even wonder what changed. The answer is beautifully simple. The relationship didn't teach you peace. You taught your nervous system that peace was finally safe. And once peace becomes familiar, chaos stops feeling like chemistry. That is the moment the old blueprint loses its power. Not because someone finally chose you, because you finally stopped measuring your worth through someone else's ability to stay. You become the safest place you've ever known. And from that place, you no longer seek relationships that recreate old wounds. You choose relationships that reflect who you've become. Know yourself. Choose better.